All right, so we've looked at walls of galaxies, right, the largest structures in the universe. Then we've looked inside the walls at the individual types of galaxies. And now we're looking inside of the galaxies themselves, and you can see clusters of stars. So inside of clusters of galaxies, there are clusters of stars called galaxies, and inside of the clusters called galaxies, there are other clusters of stars called star clusters. So it's a common feature of nature that there's a nesting effect, a hierarchical structure. It's like when you get that Russian doll and you open up the doll, or you open up a present, there's a present inside the present, a present inside that present, and so on. Well, you see that. It's a hallmark of nature that you have this series of clusters. And so clusters of galaxies produce walls, and then you have galaxies which are clusters of stars, and inside you have clusters of stars called star clusters, and then you could probably guess there are clusters of star clusters, star cluster clusters, and so on. And I'm sure there are probably star cluster clusters. Who knows? But that's life. I was amazed when I was sitting in an Old Testament class many years ago, and they were talking about how in the Bible there's this clustering effect, covenants within covenants within covenants. I said, yeah, same author. So you might expect that. So this is actually a cluster of stars inside a galaxy. Here's another star cluster and another star cluster. These are called globular clusters. I think this may be the Herculean cluster. But it's not just these stars, it's all these other stars too that are part of it. And it's interesting because they thought that there's a gravitational field here and all the stars are collapsing toward the center. But they began measuring the motion of each of the stars, and the early measurements showed that they're coming out from the center like a dandelion, and the stars are coming out like there's something producing all the stars. And now they've looked at them long enough that they say there are some stars that are moving out and other stars that are moving in. So they're in some kind of strange dance that's going on between all these stars. But anyway, there's lots of different clusters. Each of these images are separate clusters within our Milky Way. But there's, as you might imagine, lots of those. This is a star cluster, and this is a star cluster, right? And so what is this? A cluster of star clusters. There are some star clusters that have gotten a lot of attention. Here's another cluster of clusters. I'll show you those in just a second. Anyway, lots and lots of these. Some of them are far away, some of them are very close. This is a cluster you can see with your eyes. If you go out at night and you look up at the sky, you'll find a portion of the sky where though it looks like 5 stars, there's actually 7 of them, the 7 sisters. But they form like a little box with a handle sticking out. They're crisp. If you go out at night, they're the crispest looking stars out there, and they form this little tiny box. It's called Pleiades. It's a star cluster. It's actually mentioned in the Bible. When God shows up, you know, Job's complaining because he thinks he's being mistreated. And so God shows up and God starts asking him some questions. One of the questions that God asks Job, he says, Job, can you bind the chains of Pleiades? So the point is it you, Job, that stuck these stars together, that chained them together? Was that you, Job? The point is, no, it wasn't Job. It was God who put these star clusters together. It's interesting because it actually uses the phrase the chains or the influences of Pleiades. And if you look at it close with a telescope, you can see the nebula, the gas and dust, the nebular material in between their gravitational fields. So there actually is matter there that connects these clusters of stars. Not that there would have to be, but it's showing that the imagery of chains, the sweet influences of the chains of Pleiades, are actually material. It's not just metaphorical. Lots of different clusters.